This week, we will be looking at different strength training strategies to utilize when developing programs and learning proper technique for safe and effective lifting. So let's first talk about exercise technique. So at the very beginning, most free weight and machine exercise involve some sort of hand grip on a bar, a dumbbell, or handle utilized when you are using a machine. But when we look at the hand grips, probably the two most common grips utilized with resistance exercise is the pronated grip, when you have your palms down and then the knuckles are up. This is also referred to as the overhand grip. And then also you have the supinated grip, which means the palms are up with the knuckles down. Another term for this is the underhand grip. Another grip that you may often utilize whenever you are performing trap bar deadlifts is a neutral grip in which the knuckles are pointed laterally. So this is meaning like the hands are in the position as if you were going to give someone a handshake. When we look at the other hand grips that are utilized, two less common grips are the alternating grip, in which one hand is in the pronated grip and the other is in the supinated grip. We often utilize this during deadlift, so you can utilize this in conventional deadlift or sumo deadlift, but we utilize that hand grip the best just because as we get to heavier weight, right, the bar usually starts to slip or our grip strength isn't as strong compared to the pronated grip, so we will use some sort of alternated grip so the bar kind of won't roll out of our hands. The next grip is the hook grip. So this is similar to the pronated grip except that the thumb is positioned under the index and middle fingers, and we often utilize this hook grip when performing exercises such as the snatch or some sort of power exercises. Another thing to note is that in general, whenever the thumb is wrapped around the bar, this is a position called the closed grip. And whenever the thumb is not wrapped around the bar, the grip is called an open or false grip. Here's a figure looking at the different hand grips. You can see at the top portion, letter A, that is called the pronated grip. Underneath it, with B, that is your supinated grip. Right below it is the alternated grip, and then the last one, which is looking at it in a posterior view, is the hook grip. So along with the different hand grips, we need to establish the proper grip in an exercise, which involves placing the hands at the correct distance from each other, and this is often referred to as the grip width. And this is from placing the hands from the center of the bar to help maintain some balance. The three different grips or grip widths that are utilized are the common grip width, the wide grip width, and the narrow grip width. So we'll often utilize the common grip width whenever we are performing some sort of conventional deadlift or utilizing some sort of bent over barbell row. When we look at the narrow grip width, we might be utilizing that during a sumo deadlift or some sort of other exercise. The wide grip width will often utilize the snatch grip. This is kind of interchangeable, but we often utilize the snatch grip or the wide grip for the power exercise, such as the snatch exercise. Another part of the technique is having a stable body and the different limb positioning. So an exercise often requires lifting a barbell or a dumbbell from the floor or pushing and pulling while one is positioned in or on a machine. So by establishing a stable position, it's very critical for safety and optimal performance. So a stable position allows the athlete to maintain proper body alignment during the exercise, which then places an appropriate stress on the muscles and joints appropriately. So generally speaking, whenever you are performing some sort of exercise in a standing position, this is typically going to require that the feet are positioned slightly wider than hip width, with the heels and the balls of your feet in contact with the floor. So by establishing a stable position in or on a machine, it will often require some adjusting of the seat or resistance arm and then fastening some sort of belt snugly. And when we think of these belts, this can be utilizing in some sort of knee extension exercise where you are utilizing some free weights in a sense, where you have the plate loaded ones, so that's still a machine based exercise. Or if you kind of see those machines with the squats where they have individuals kind of wrap a belt around you and place some weights and perform a squat, that's another one. Whenever we have an athlete perform an exercise in the seated position, such as the seated shoulder press, or the supine position, such as the bench press, we want the athlete to position the body to achieve a 5-point body contact position. So here's kind of the criteria or the list that you want to check whenever you have your athletes perform this. So always make sure that the head is placed firmly on the bench or the back pad. The shoulders and the upper back are placed firmly and evenly on the bench or the back pad. Also, the buttocks are placed evenly on the bench or the seat. And then lastly, we have the right foot is flat on the floor, and then the left foot is also flat on the floor. By establishing and maintaining this 5-point body contact position at the very beginning, and then also throughout the movement phases, promotes maximal stability, and then also helps with maintaining that spine in a neutral position. When we are looking at exercise in machines, these have an axis of rotation which require specific positioning of the athlete's body, arms, or legs. So the reason why they have some sort of specific positioning is for safety reasons and for optimal execution. Just to give an example, whenever we are performing some sort of knee extension exercise, right, whenever you look at the machine, right, there's going to be some sort of, axis of rotation, and that's where you want your knee to be or knee joint to be aligned with. But to align the primary joint of the body involved in the exercise with the machines, we may need to adjust the seat. If you're performing on a different machine that is utilizing the ankle or the arm, we're going to have to adjust the roller pad for that, or thigh, chest, or back pad. If you're performing some sort of seated row, we're going to have to adjust the seat pad or the seat up and down, and then the pad as well, as far as distance wise. So whenever you are performing the movement, you are performing it at the proper range of motion. When performing an exercise in its full range of motion, the value of the exercise is maximized, and then the flexibility is maintained or even improved. So ideally, an exercise full range of motion should mimic the full range of motion of the involved joint or the joints in order for the greatest improvements to occur. But we know that sometimes this isn't possible or even recommended depending on what type of exercise that you are performing. Other things when we're talking about the range of motion and kind of the speed that you're performing this type of exercise is that the repetitions should be performed in a slow, controlled manner, which increase the likelihood that the full range of motion can be achieved. However, though, whenever we have power or quick lifting exercises such as the push jerk or the power clean, an effort should be made to accelerate the bar to a maximal speed while still maintaining control and proper form throughout the exercise. So whenever we are performing these types of power exercises initially, or with new beginners, it's always good to start out at a very, very light load. So you may be utilizing just a broomstick just to get the exercise technique down. So whenever you start, adding more weight to it, they have the proper, safety measurements and exercise technique to lift it properly so they won't injure themselves. A big fundamental of exercise technique is actually breathing. So during exercise, the most strenuous movement during the repetition is typically after the transition from the eccentric phase to the concentric phase. And this is referred to as your sticking point. So just for example, whenever we are performing some sort of, barbell curl, whenever we are lowering the barbell down to kind of your upper thighs to the waist, that is lowering and lengthening your bicep muscle, so that is your eccentric phase or portion. But whenever we are lifting the barbell up, when we have your bicep shortening, that is called the concentric action. But your sticking point is going to occur midway through the upward movement. So the breathing technique is that we want to have your athlete exhale during this portion. So just kind of generally, whenever we want your athletes or any individuals to exhale during the concentric phase, and then inhale usually during the eccentric portion or the kind of the less stressful phase. Whenever you have new beginners, who are new to lifting, they're not going to really understand the actual breathing technique of when to inhale and when to exhale, but just as long as they are breathing throughout the whole duration of the exercise. Just because if they're holding their breath the whole time, that might cause them to pass out, and that can lead to injury, and we want to avoid that. Even though we want individuals to exhale during the concentric portion of the lift or the sticking point and inhale during the eccentric portion or the less stressful phase of the lift, there are some situations in which breath holding may be suggested. So for experienced resistance trained individuals performing structural exercises, and these structural exercises are those that load the vertebral column and therefore place stress on it. When utilizing such high loads, the Valsalva maneuver can be helpful for maintaining proper vertebral alignment and then support. So when we think of the Valsalva maneuver, this involves expiring against a closed glottis, which when combined with you are contracting the abdominal and the rib cage muscles, this creates a rigid compartments of fluid in the lower torso and air in the upper torso. So the advantage of utilizing the Valsalva maneuver is that this increase in the rigidity of the entire torso to aid and support the vertebral column, which will in turn reduce the associated compressive forces on your discs in the vertebral column during lifting. So most of the time, you'll utilize this Valsalva maneuver when performing a deadlift or a heavy back squat or so forth. But by utilizing this is going to help establish and maintain a normal lumbar spine position, and also keep that neutral spine position, and having an erect upper torso position, and by doing so, that's going to avoid some sort of potential injury. Just be aware though that by utilizing this technique, this is going to increase your intra-abdominal pressure, which has some side effects such as dizziness, disorientation, excessively high blood pressure, just because you're holding your kind of air in and causing some sort of compression against the veins, and then possibly blacking out. So this is why, whenever we are performing this technique, it should only be, performed transiently. So only about 1 to 2 seconds at the very most. So even, well-trained individuals should not extend that length, just because blood pressure and all these negative side effects can occur. So this is why whenever you are performing your 1 rep max on days, particularly for squats, and you hit that sticking point and you're kind of struggling for a few seconds, that's where if you miss it or if you get it, and once you rack the bar, that's where after you start breathing again, you start feeling lightheaded, you're a little bit dizzy, you start seeing stars. So this is part of that side effect by utilizing this technique. But it can be very useful, just so, again, utilize this appropriately whenever you are having athletes or just any individuals perform these type of exercises. A device that is often utilized is a weight belt. So a weight belt may help maintain intra-abdominal pressure during lifting. So its appropriateness depends on the type of exercise performed and the load that is lifted. So it's recommended that a weight belt should be worn during exercises that place stress on the lower back, and then during sets that use near maximal or maximal loads. So whenever we are thinking about this, this is where you want to utilize a weight belt during a 1RM lift, or around 95% of your 1RM. So in conjunction, whenever you are utilizing the Valsalva maneuver as well, this is going to help maintain that neutral spine, right, and then trying to prevent an injury in the lower back. But these weight belts that you utilize can help reduce the risk of lower back injury, alongside with the proper lifting technique, and then also with the Valsalva maneuver. Kind of a negative downside of utilizing weight belt is that if you wear it too often, it's going to reduce the opportunities for the abdominal muscles to be trained. So kind of a good theory is that we don't want to utilize weight belts for any types of exercises that don't stress the lower back, such as bicep curls, lat pull downs, anything like that. You'll often see that in your gym. You see individuals wear a belt pretty much the whole time while they're lifting. Some of their theory, of thinking is that if they don't wear a weight belt, that their waistline is going to get huge. And that by wearing a weight belt, it's going to help to minimize that expansion. Other things you want to utilize or kind of consider with the weight belt is that there are different types. So you have your very basic ones that you see that you can buy at Dick's Sporting Goods, that are kind of like your nylon ones. But then you also have your thicker ones, more for like your powerlifting, Olympic lifting exercises or areas. It's going to be a leather belt. It's going to be a lot thicker and a little bit more stable. And those cost a little bit more, but they last a lot longer, and they are a lot better compared to kind of like your nylon ones with the Velcro. The things with when you think about the weight belts too and how to utilize that, if you are kind of working up to your 1 rep max, particularly the squat, you can probably do the first couple of sets without the weight belt in itself. But whenever you start getting closer towards your maximal lift or a lot higher load, I would put on, or suggest that you put on your weight belt, just because if you're performing a squat, it might change your technique up a little bit as far as how your spine's loaded and where the angle is at. And this is especially if you're utilizing one of the thick leather belts as well. Also, the placement of your weight belt is going to matter too. So usually you would think it's going to be kind of at your belly button, or kind of pretty low at your waist, and that's often utilized with the Velcro ones. But whenever you are utilizing a thicker one or a leather one, you want to place it up a little bit higher for that, so it's not right at your belly button, it's a little bit above. So there's different techniques on which belt you're utilizing for that. But again, just make sure that you are utilizing these weight belts appropriately and that they are being utilized for maximal load, so you can help develop that core abdominal muscle whenever you are lifting in general. When we are lifting, we often are lifting with a partner possibly, and then whenever we are lifting near maximal loads, we often need a spotter. So a spotter is someone who assists in the execution of an exercise to help protect the athlete from an injury. So a spotter can also serve to help motivate the athlete or individual or your partner, and then help in the completion of any forced repetitions if you are prescribing that into your exercise program. But the spotter's primary responsibility is the safety of the athlete that is being spotted. So if the spotter is doing a poor job, then this can result in possibly a serious injury, not only to the athlete being spotted, but also the spotter themselves, and then possibly other individuals in close proximity. So if you are bad at spotting, say during the bench press, and aren't utilizing clips at the ends of towards the end of the plates while utilizing heavy loads, if the athlete fails and then one bar slips or the weight slips to at the one side of the barbell and falls off, and then that's going to cause some sort of reaction, and then it's going to tilt the other way, and then the plates can go flying. So you've probably seen this in the gym where that happens. But if you had a spotter, they can help you get that back to the rack itself, and then rack it so you don't have any of this situations. But there are different types of exercise where spotters are kind of utilized, and they're mainly for free weight exercises. And this is usually whenever individuals are performing over the head exercise, such as the barbell shoulder press, or with the bar on their back, such as the back squat. There's other situations where if the individual is performing exercise such as the front squat, where the bar is racked anteriorly on the shoulders or on the clavicles. That's a good spotting technique. Or over the face, such as the bench press or lying tricep extensions. Anything where there's providing some sort of challenge for the athlete, and by doing so needs to execute that exercise properly. Whenever you are looking at dumbbells, such as like bicep curls or side lateral raises, you don't need a spotter. You might see individuals, particularly like bodybuilders, will utilize a spotter mainly for like forced repetitions, and the theory is to increase the volume to increase that muscle hypertrophy and so forth. So whenever we are spotting, we'll kind of go over the next few slides on how to spot individuals appropriately. When spotting during overhead exercises or those with the bar on the back or front of the shoulders to promote the safety for the athlete, yourself, and then others nearby, these exercises should be performed inside a power rack with the crossbars in place at the appropriate height. So we want to place all the plates, any leftover bars, locks, and anything else cleared from the lifting area, and then also the bar path itself. So one of the things is that, since the loads that are lifted in these exercise can be, pretty heavy as far as the load lifted, the leverage of the spotter or spotters should be just as strong or at least as tall as the athlete who is actually lifting. So whenever we look at powerlifting competitions, you'll often see multiple spotters. So you'll see, particularly for the squat, you'll see spotter at each end of the barbell, and then you'll see another spotter behind the individual. So if they're struggling, they can help them assist it and get up so they can rack it properly. Out of the rack exercises, whenever you're performing, a step up or anything with such a heavy weight, may lead to some sort of serious injury. But these exercises should be only executed by well-trained and skilled athletes, and then spotted by experienced professionals. Whenever you're spotting over the face barbell exercise, it's very important that you grasp the bar with an alternating grip, and this is usually going to be a grip narrower than the athlete's grip. In some cases, because of the bar's curved trajectory in some exercises, such as the barbell pullover, the spotter should use an alternating grip to pick up the bar and return it to the floor, but a supinated grip to spot the bar. So by doing so, this helps ensure that the bar doesn't roll out of the spotter's hands and then onto the athlete's face or neck. One of the things, kind of a story with the barbell over the face exercises and spotting. This was years ago with a USC running back. He was performing bench press and he was using a false grip. So if you remember, a false grip is a grip that doesn't have the thumbs wrapped around. I'm not too sure. I can't remember what they said, if his spotter was paying attention or wasn't, or if it just happened to be one of those random accidents that it just slipped out of his palms. But it fell on his throat and then crushed his larynx and his voice box, and he had to have immediate surgery. So very almost like life-threatening in that. So he can talk now, but his voice doesn't sound as the same as previously. But luckily, they were able to rush him to the hospital and get immediate help that way. So you as the spotter, being called upon to catch the ball or assist in these moderate to heavy loads, should be paying attention all the time, and also you want to establish a solid wide base of support and then having a neutral spine. So just because your partner or your athlete or individual has done this so many times, there's always that chance of it going wrong. So always be paying attention. Whenever we're looking at dumbbell exercises, though, it's very important to spot as close to the dumbbells as possible in some exercises, such as the bench press, whenever we are using dumbbells. There are some cases, though, that some individuals advocate spotting dumbbell movements by placing the hands on the athlete's upper arms or elbows. You see this in the gym that you go to, like Club Fitness or anything like that, or LA Fitness. But this technique, though, can possibly lead to injury. So if you have the athlete's elbows possibly collapse, the spotter won't be able be in a proper position to stop the dumbbells from striking the athlete's face or chest or anything like that. So spotting at the forearms near the wrist is a lot safer technique. So by doing so, you're not going to have that possibility of the collapsing or the dropping of the dumbbells hitting the athlete's body part of the face or the chest and leading to injury. Here in this figure, we can see the incorrect spotting technique here on to the left side, where the individual is spotting based off the elbows, and where the picture on the right is displaying the correct spotting technique utilizing dumbbells, where it's a little bit closer to the dumbbells itself. So when we look at the number of spotters that's needed, this is going to be largely determined by the load being lifted, the experience and ability of the athlete and the spotters, and the physical strength of the spotters as well. So kind of going back to the example I gave you during powerlifting meets during the back squat, there's usually 3 spotters, one on each side of the barbell and then one behind the individual. With the heavier loads that are being utilized, there's a likelihood and severity of injuries that are increased. So once the load exceeds the spotter's ability to effectively protect the athlete, another spotter must be involved, and that's why with powerlifting they are utilizing the 3 spotters. Just because if you just had one spotter from behind, it's not going to help the athlete or that individual rack the weight. Just because with these powerlifting meets, they can get up to 1,000 pounds on their back performing 1 repetition maximum. So that's why more spotters are needed, so you can kind of distribute that load somewhat evenly. But the thing though is that whenever you are incorporating more spotters, you must coordinate each other's actions along with the athlete, just because as the number of spotters increase, so does that chance of error in timing or technique may occur. So you have to have, as spotters with lots of individuals, make sure that you guys are on the same page of when to take it, whenever you're spotting, and then so forth. Just because there are sometimes that one individual might think that the athlete is struggling enough and will start helping, while the other spotters aren't, and that may cause some sort of imbalance and then injure the athlete. So this is where the communication between the athlete and spotter or spotters come pretty much into play for that. The thing with communication is determining how many repetitions are going to be performed. So as athletes, you want to say, I'm trying to aim for 8 repetitions, and as a spotter, that's their goal. So you're going to be paying attention throughout until at least 8 repetitions. So you have to just make sure and pay attention that if they get 6 and they're struggling, that you're going to have to help them. And another big portion between communication is the actual lift off. So lifting off is very important. You can do a countdown, 3, 2, 1 lift, or 1, 2, 3 up, different varieties, but nevertheless, just make sure that you guys are on the same page. One of the things is that you don't want to, kind of help unrack or, lift the bar off too soon for the athlete, just because that might cause the athlete to have some sort of imbalance. All right, so they may not be ready, and by doing so, that can throw their mechanics off and possibly lead to injury. So by doing everything done correctly with the 1, 2, 3 lift, that's going to minimize that chance. The timing of spotting and assisting of the actual lifts itself is based off of knowing how much and when to help an athlete is very important. And this is going to require the spotter to be very experienced in the proper spotting techniques. So most of the athletes typically just need enough help to successfully complete a repetition through that sticking point. But there are some other times that they may need the spotter to handle the entire load. Generally speaking, you can give some time during that sticking point for the athlete to try and lift, the weight up in its full range of motion. If they aren't making any progress, that's whenever you'll start taking it or assisting them with it. Or if the athlete just knows that they're not just going to make it, they'll just say take it. So always be ready on spotting and the timing in itself. But you kind of want these spotting techniques and different ways to help minimize that injury risk. When we think of resistance exercise or resistance training, we often think of just utilizing some sort of free weights, such as barbells or dumbbells, and then performing exercises like the bench press, the squat, or the deadlift. But we can also utilize different training methods while programming. One of them is body weight training. So this is a method which is the most basic method for performing some sort of resistance training. Specifically, we are utilizing the body weight of the individual to provide some sort of resistance. And we know these activities such as push-ups, we can do pull-ups, chin-ups, sit-ups, and so forth. And by doing so, these body weight training exercises are pretty low cost training, meaning you don't need a lot of equipment available, and allows the athlete or the individual to develop some sort of relative strength levels. Whenever we are doing some body weight training, some individuals may not have that strong of a base, so this is where we are going to have individuals kind of progress until they get to the actual form. So like for pull-ups, not a lot of individuals can do a pull-up utilizing their own body weight. So we can, try to get to that by, progression of assisted pull-ups, and then slowly, decreasing that weight on the assisted pull-up as the individual gets stronger. And then eventually they should be able to get to a pull-up themselves. One of the issues related to body weight resistance training is that the resistant load is limited to the individual's body weight. So body weight training tends not to significantly affect the absolute strength levels. So to kind of increase the intensity of body weight exercises, you can do different things, such as including the increasing the number of repetitions or changing some sort of movement pattern. But you can shift these different things towards some sort of goal. Simple modifications can be also utilized during these exercises. But the thing with these is that these are pretty low cost. It can help also improve body control for these individuals, just because, again, if we kind of go back to the pull-up example, and them having to try and do a pull-up, they might be kicking their legs, flailing their legs, favoring one side whenever they're trying to do that, and so forth. But kind of these body weight training methods, they're often going to include some sort of closed chain based type of exercise for that. So there's a whole different ways to utilize body weight training into the actual program design. Some exercises that you can incorporate in program design is core stability exercises and balance training. So the term core is commonly used in the popular media and in some training journals to refer to the trunk, or more specifically, the lumbopelvic region of the body. Typically, the anatomical core is defined as the axial skeleton and all the soft tissues with proximal attachments that originate on the axial skeleton. So it's important to note that the axial skeleton includes the pelvic and shoulder girdles, and then the soft tissues include the different cartilages, ligaments, tendons, and muscles. So the muscles that are typically associated with the core allow for the transference of torques and angular momentum during the performance of some sort of integrated kinetic chain activities, such as kicking and throwing. One thing, though, is that having or increasing the athlete's core stability may result in better foundation for the force production in the upper and lower arms. So that's why whenever you kind of think of boxing and kind of the power, it all kind of comes from the lower body through the core and then into the actual arms. When we look at other core stability and balance training exercise techniques, we can also look at isolation exercises. So isolation exercises typically consist of dynamic or isometric muscle actions designed to isolate specific core musculature without the contribution of the lower and upper extremities. So probably the most common exercise performed to isolate the core is the plank or the side plank. So this is by providing some sort of isolation, this can help increase muscle activation, which has kind of been shown to result in improvements in spinal stability and a reduction in injuries. But there is some evidence that that this transfer of isolation exercises to actual sports performance isn't very effective. So maybe that, performing ground-based free weight exercises, so squats, deadlifts, push presses, anything like that involving free weights, may offer a greater benefit to the actual sports performance compared to the isolated core training. And this kind of makes sense, right? Just because you are going through some sort of range of motion for that particular sport, and while doing so, you're also incorporating some sort of your core activation. So when we think of that, the isolation exercises that you're performing, may have the actual greatest benefit for injured athletes who are going through some sort of rehab process and aren't able to adequately load traditional ground-based free weight exercises. And once the individual is, rehabbed through their, process and able to start lifting again, then you can start incorporating those, traditional ground-based free weight exercises, so they can, get back to improving their sports performance. With resistance training, there's often two different types of ways to train, either using machines or using free weights. Both of them have advantages and disadvantages. With regard to the machine-based training, the stability provided by the machine may result in a better ability to target specific muscle groups, but as far as sports performance goes, the muscle rarely, if ever, functions in that isolated fashion in which the machine provides. When we look at your stabilizer muscles, it's generally accepted that the activation of these muscles is a lot greater in free weight training compared to machine-based. And also, when we kind of look at machines and free weights, the machines have a fixed path. So when we kind of look at, say, if you utilize the Smith machine for bench press, that's pretty much a straight path, just going up and down. But whenever you perform free weight exercise, you don't want the bar really to go straight up and down. You really want it to kind of have like a kind of a curve. So you bring it down to your chest, and then when you're pushing it back up, you want to kind of have a slight curve back towards the rack. So that path is going to be a lot different compared to your Smith machine. However, we often kind of look at instability as well, and this is part of kind of machines versus free weights. So if we provide free weight exercise, that's going to provide us with instability. So that means we have to engage our core muscles and our stabilizer muscles a lot more compared to these machine-based exercises and utilizing the machines. So if we somehow try to add on top of that instability by performing, say, bicep curls on a Bosu ball or something, we can possibly see that it's not going to provide any additional benefit. So just in general, kind of speaking, the combination of free weight exercise, which are ground based, offers already a good stimulus of specificity and instability, especially whenever you're focusing on strength and power. So just again, by like adding a Bosu ball on top of that, isn't going to provide any increase of performance for that. So you'll often see this within Twitter or Instagram. You'll see like these pro athletes doing these crazy exercises on like a Bosu ball while lifting heavy weights. The only thing that's bad about that, and with that, is that it's going to just cause an increase in injury risk for them. So you don't have to. Instability devices may have their place into your training program in itself, but it doesn't necessarily need to be added whenever you are performing free weight exercises, just because it already provides enough stimulus. Instability exercises are often performed on unstable surfaces or devices, which are commonly found in strength and conditioning facilities. So this increase in popularity of training on instability devices have stemmed from their use by physiotherapists during the rehabilitation process. So these devices are used to promote postural disequilibrium or imbalance, which causes and requires a greater stabilizing function of the core musculature. So if perturbations are applied during the use of these exercises or devices, a balance challenge can occur that requires the activation of the core in order to induce postural adjustments to remain upright. So there are a bunch of different devices that are often utilized. So we have the Swiss ball, the physio ball, the Pezzi gymnastics ball. Some other things are, your Bosu balls. You have those inflatable discs, your wobble boards, balance boards, foam tubes, and other various things as well. One of the things is that even though that they may help increase core muscle activation, the downside is that it can lower force output of an exercise by 30% or more. So just generally speaking, there's limited research that kind of suggests the performance of resistance exercise on unstable devices by athletes, just because this is going to cause a lower force output, and as athletes you want to produce the most forceful output that you can during some sort of exercise, and hopefully that would translate onto the field. But these performance-based activities on balancing and on instability devices may be considered kind of as maybe some sort of introductory training step to improve balance and core stability, at first, before you start introducing, athletes or individuals to dynamic or explosive ground-based exercises, just so they can kind of get that, core muscle activation initially started. The one thing, though, is, again, whenever we are creating our programs, remember we want to be as sport specific as we can. So there's not really ever a time that you're going to perform a squat while the ground is shaking. So this is where you see you've seen the memes or the pictures where you have an individual performing a full squat on a physio ball or on a Bosu ball. It just doesn't make too much sense in the way, just because with the back squat you want all that force driving down into the ground surface, so you can increase your strength. But if you're doing it on that unstable surface, like I mentioned, we're losing all that force output. When it comes to resistance training, there are 3 different methods for applying overload to the body. One method is constant external load, another one is accommodating, and the last method is variable resistance. The most common method for applying resistance during training is to use the constant external load, and this is best represented by traditional resistance training methods such as free weights, which you always often do. So during this time, the external load remains constant throughout the range of motion, and by doing so, this better represents real life activities with this method, and allows for more realistic skeletal muscle coordination and movement pattern. When it comes to accommodating resistance, this is often referred to as semi-isokinetic resistance. Generally speaking, this allows for the speed of movement or isokinetic resistance to be controlled throughout the range of motion. So it's been kind of suggested that these types of devices have poor external validity. Additionally, though, these devices are unlikely to provide an adequate training stimulus when compared to your traditional methods such as constant external load during your free weight movements, particularly when those movements are performed with multi-joint movement patterns or exercises. When we perform traditional resistance training exercise, the external load remains constant, but the forces exerted by the muscle vary in accordance with the mechanical advantages associated with the joints involved in the actual movement. So in order to combat the changing mechanical advantages and initial properties associated with the constant load resistance, there has been some sort of effort to develop some training devices that allow the applied resistance to be varied in conjunction with changes in the joint angle. So these variable resistance methods attempt to alter the resistance so that muscle maximizes force application pretty much throughout the full range of motion. So for example, we can look at the back squat. The greatest force production occurs at the top portion of the movement, while the smallest forces are produced at the bottom. So whenever we are utilizing the variable resistance methods, would kind of be used to reduce the resistance at the bottom of the squatting motion, and then increase the resistance as the athlete ascends from the bottom position to the top. So kind of overall, though, when we are looking at this method, this may be able to match the changes in the joint leverage Also, it can overcome the mechanical disadvantages associated with specific joint angles and provide some, compensatory acceleration. Just because when we are kind of doing some sort of, concentric lift, a large portion of the time is spent kind of de-accelerating it, coming to the top, such as the bicep curl. When we are utilizing these variable load resistance models or methodology, we often see this applied in the gym setting, and this can be utilized through chains or rubber bands. So by applying these chains and bands with traditional free weight exercise, it's been shown to kind of alter the loading profile, typically seen during the constant loading activities. And with these, they allow for the resistance to be varied across the range of motion during the activity. A popular method of applying variable resistance is the addition of chains to traditional resistance exercise, such as the bench press and back squat. You'll see this method often utilized in the powerlifting community. The resistance provided by chains is largely dictated by the structure, the density, the length, and diameter of the chain, and must be quantified before the chain is used in a resistance training setting. So one thing to consider is the number of links in a chain will affect the amount of resistance provided by the chain. We can see here in this table a way to quantify the loading provided by the chains by looking at the chain mass, the length, and diameter. So deciding on the barbell resistance to use in conjunction with the chains, the absolute load is determined for the top and bottom portion of the movement. Then the average of these two loads is then calculated and used to modify the barbell load in order to allow the athlete to train in a prescribed range. So the use of chains should be reserved, though, for experienced, intermediate, and elite level athletes who have some stable exercise techniques, as the addition of these chains provides a loading challenge that can affect the athlete's technique. The application of chains to resistance training allows for a linear increase in the applied resistance. There are different ways to apply the chains. You can apply the chains by letting them touch the floor from the fully extended position during the movement, or hanging them from lighter chains, which allows them to touch the floor only upon reaching the lowest portion of the movement pattern. Whenever the chains pile on the floor and the mass of the barbell decreases, a greater neuromuscular activation may occur, which allows for an enhancement in movement velocity. Additionally, it may also cause a more rapid stretch shortening cycle. Resistance bands is another method used for variable load resistance. The use of resistance bands are becoming popular within the strength and conditioning field. So when working with resistance bands, it is important to understand that their composition varies depending on the type of thermoplastic or elastomer used to produce them. The composition of resistance bands is important because it can exert an impact on their overall stiffness, density, yield, and their tensile strength. The resistance or tension by the band is determined by the overall stiffness of the band and the extent to which the band is stretched. We can use Hooke's law, which is the tension generated by a band is equal to its stiffness multiplied by the stretch or deformation. It should be noted that when bands are combined with free weight exercises, that there can be a 3.2 to 5.2% difference between two supposedly equal bands, which could lead to an 8 to 19% difference in mean tension between the bands. Determining the resistance with bands is similar to chains, in which the load of the band at the bottom and top portions of the movement must be determined and then create an average of the two loads. In general, the highest load is experienced at the top position. There are some non-traditional training methods that you may consider incorporating into your program design for the athlete, such as strongman training. This includes tire flipping, log lifting, and the farmer's walk. These exercises may create a greater degree of instability that effectively challenges the athlete in different ways compared to traditional resistance training. When it comes to tire flipping, you'll typically use truck or heavy equipment tires. Selecting the appropriate tire size is dependent on the tire's dimensions, such as the height, the width, and the weight. So a general rule is the tire should not be taller than the athlete's upright standing height. The width will also play a factor, as taller individuals will have a harder time with a narrow tire and a shorter athlete will have a harder time with a wide tire. So there are 3 different ways to kind of flip a tire, which include the sumo way, the back lift, which is kind of more of your conventional deadlift style, and then shoulders against the tire, which is more your practical application on flipping a tire. There are some common technique flaws when it comes to tire flipping. One flaw is placing the feet too close to the tire when initiating the movement. When this occurs, athletes often have to round their back and position their knees close to their chest in order to initiate the movement. So to correct this, you will want to have the athlete move the feet away from the tire and instruct them to raise the chest while contracting the musculature of the lower back. Another flaw of tire flipping is that the hips rise faster than the shoulders during the initial pushing motion. This flaw is very similar to what can be seen during traditional deadlifting with incorrect technique. So to correct this, you will want to instruct the athlete to keep their hips low and drive the tire forward rather than lifting it. Additionally, encourage the athlete to keep their hips slightly below the shoulders during this movement. The last flaw is when the athlete is using a lifting motion instead of a pushing motion. With heavier tires, this motion reduces the lifting speed as the tire will lose momentum. So this forces the athlete to muscle the tire over. This is extremely dangerous and should be corrected immediately by having the athlete drive the tire forward and move forward with the tire as it's elevated. A classic exercise that is a part of strongman training is the log lift, which is a version of the clean. You can utilize log lifting with other traditional lifting movements such as presses, jerks, rows, squats, deadlifts, and lunges. The logs are designed to have weight added to them while offering a mid-range grip to accommodate a pronated grip position. You can add weight using traditional plates, which helps eliminate the need for a variety of different logs. When it comes to the training load, with log lifting, you can use the intensity that you would utilize with traditional resistance training. The last strongman training technique that you can utilize when program designing is the farmer's walk. This is where the athlete holds a load at the sides in each hand while walking forward. This can be useful because the farmer's walk involves unstable and awkward resistances that have both unilateral and bilateral motion. So farmer's walk may help develop total body anaerobic endurance, back endurance, core activation and stabilization, and grip strength. Most likely you are going to utilize this as far as grip strength. Also with farmer's walk, you can also improve the athlete's posture. So when we're talking about posture, we don't want rounded shoulders or the chest leaning forward or a hunched back. So we want our back muscles to be a lot stronger than our chest muscles. But with the farmer's walk, you can utilize dumbbells, kettlebells, trap bar, or a variable load device like water-filled objects. So in general, the farmer's walk should be implemented towards athletes with high levels of strength. Kettlebell training is increasing in popularity. However, the use of kettlebells have been utilized hundreds of years ago. A kettlebell is a weighted implement consisting of a ball with a handle. So the most common exercise employed with a kettlebell is the kettlebell swing, which can be performed with one or two hands. Kettlebell swings may have a positive impact on cardiovascular fitness, but doesn't compare to the effects as treadmill running or more traditional aerobic exercise. Also, kettlebell swings can improve strength gains, but to a lesser degree compared to the traditional methods of resistance training. You can also utilize kettlebells in a variety of different ways, such as goblet squats, farmer's walk, presses, walking overhead lunges, and you can also even utilize kettlebells during power exercises. When working with kettlebells, you should consider the type of kettlebell as there are different types. The two major types is the cast iron and sport kettlebell. The cast iron kettlebells range in size depending on their weight, while the sport kettlebell have a universal design and measurements. The size of the kettlebell does not change based on the weight, and the various weights are indicated by different colors while utilizing the sport kettlebell. When you are looking at the prices of these two kettlebells, the cast iron kettlebell is less expensive. So a major thing to consider though when selecting a kettlebell is the type of load provided. So the cast iron and sport kettlebells have a constant load while they also make adjustable kettlebells. So these bells are either plate loaded or shot loaded. Another thing to consider is the actual handle of the kettlebell. The handle diameter changes slightly as the weight increases for the cast iron kettlebells. One thing also is that the handle surface is another factor where polished steel handles allow for a better grip because it allows individuals to hold chalk up, and the chalk holds up better and doesn't get as slippery as painted or polished handles. When program designing, you can employ unilateral training. Training can be performed in the upper body and lower body. Some common unilateral training in the lower body are lunges, step-ups, and the single leg squat. The single leg squat is sometimes referred to as the Bulgarian split squat. The upper body can utilize unilateral training by the use of the shoulder press, rows, and chest press. Unilateral training attempts to reduce bilateral asymmetries or as a rehabilitation tool. The exercises are often used to reduce a bilateral deficit where there are asymmetries in force production between unilateral and bilateral movements. Also, bilateral movements exhibit a bilateral facilitation in which there is an increase in voluntary activation of the agonist muscle group. Trained or stronger individuals tend to exhibit a bilateral facilitation, while untrained or weaker individuals exhibit a bilateral deficit. One method of training that is gaining in popularity is blood flow restriction training. So what blood flow restriction training is, you are placing a pneumatic cuff or an elastic wrap on the upper arm or thigh. And the goal of this is that you are reducing arterial inflow and restricting venous return. So you're causing this pooling of the blood. With blood flow restriction training, you are lifting a load of 20 to 30% of your 1 rep max. And you can utilize blood flow restriction training with single joint exercises such as the leg extension, bicep curls, tricep extension, etc. And also you can utilize it in compound exercises such as the bench press or squat. One thing with blood flow restriction exercise is that you are applying some sort of restriction pressure with this pneumatic cuff. That's why you are and how you are reducing your arterial inflow and causing that venous pulling. So I'll just say this one thing though, is that you're still getting blood flow into the muscle, right? So you're still getting that, and you're also still getting blood flow back to the heart whenever you're performing some sort of muscular contraction. So you're not occluding it. So that's totally different whenever it comes to kind of a tourniquet, whenever you're out in the medical field trying to stop blood flow. With your restriction pressure, you are applying it based off of different values. You can utilize 130% of the systolic blood pressure value of what you have. You can also use a percentage of resting arterial occlusion pressure. So your resting arterial occlusion pressure is the amount of pressure needed to occlude blood flow. So say you have a resting arterial occlusion pressure of 100 millimeters of mercury. So applying a percentage of that, say 40%, right? So that's just going to be 40 millimeters of mercury or some sort of pressure during blood flow restriction. There have been also previous literature applying an arbitrary pressure, so the same pressure to everyone, but based off some research and the literature, that's not always safe, as some individuals that may be actually occluding blood flow based off the individual's width of their bicep or thigh, and then kind of the width of the cuff. We can maybe discuss this another time later on, or if you have any questions, you can email me about this. There are different ways to utilize blood flow restriction. One of the ways is in the absence of exercise. So this is applying blood flow restriction following ACL surgery, just because in the first couple days following ACL surgery, you can't be lifting or anything of that nature. So by applying blood flow restriction, you can kind of help attenuate the muscle loss. Another way is applying blood flow restriction to kind of aerobic exercise. And when we're talking about aerobic exercise, we're talking about low intensity. So with low intensity, that's walking very slowly, or you can even do it on a bicycle. But probably the most common way that blood flow restriction exercise is utilized is through resistance training. And again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you can apply it to single joint exercises or compound exercises. So the most popular use of blood flow restriction training and why professionals are utilizing it is more geared towards muscle hypertrophy. They'll also utilize it in rehabilitation situations, and then also to help attenuate atrophy. But the main goal is muscle hypertrophy, and this is where a lot of strength and conditioning professionals are utilizing this, just because with muscle hypertrophy, this will help possibly translate into strength gains, and that's going to help some sort of performance on field. With blood flow restriction training, this can be applied to a variety of different populations, one being athletes. Another population is the elderly population, just because, with the elderly, they may not be inclined to lift heavy all the time, and where so, they're a little bit more comfortable lifting a lighter load. So to help increase, muscle hypertrophy, you can utilize blood flow restriction, and utilizing that in combination with the 20 to 30% of their 1RM. And this will kind of help offset, sarcopenia and help them maintain a independent life. Also, individuals, particularly astronauts with NASA, can benefit from this. The reason why is, our main goal or our mission is to, get individuals to Mars. And while they're in space, you have this, significant loss of muscle mass. So one way to, kind of combat that is, resistance exercise. But, with the spaceship, they have these weight limit restrictions and trying to, get best fuel efficiency. So if you can, have some sort of equipment that, isn't very expensive, and these astronauts can perform and still see some benefit, that's going to help NASA in that way. Whenever you are programming, you can implement blood flow restriction to kind of decrease the heavy load days for some athletes. So maybe one day they're not really feeling a heavy load, they're not performing as well. You may have them just do some blood flow restriction training. Just because with blood flow restriction training, you can still see and observe similar benefits compared to heavy load training. But when you are performing blood flow restriction, this is going to consist of 4 sets, where the first set is going to be performing 30 repetitions. And then following the next 3 sets is going to be 15 repetitions. And with that, you want 30 to 60 seconds of rest in between each set. We'll say one thing though is that if you've never done blood flow restriction training before, it will be very discomforting. You may not get all the repetitions, but your goal repetitions is going to be the 30, 15, 15, 15. But as you get more comfortable with blood flow restriction training, the discomfort will be decrease over time, just because your perceptual response will get decrease over time, just because you're kind of getting used to that. Also, depending on the amount of pressure you're applying during blood flow restriction will also determine your discomfort level. You can utilize, within the literature, you can utilize a high pressure or a moderate pressure. And it seems that a moderate pressure is just as effective compared to a high pressure. So the only difference really would just be your discomfort level there. So blood flow restriction, it's pretty useful. You may start if for you guys who are athletes and doing strength conditioning already, if you haven't utilized it, you'll probably, I'm guessing, will be utilizing it here soon. Or if you have, you kind of have a good experience with it and so forth. So this is just another way that you can utilize and implement into your program design. There are different ways to utilize your sets and repetitions whenever you are prescribing. One of the ways is utilizing drop or strip sets, and this is performing a set to volitional fatigue and then reducing the load and performing another set to volitional fatigue. You'll often see this in the bodybuilding community, but you can also utilize this with the athletes. Most likely, you're going to utilize these drop sets for some of your assistive exercises and not for your core or structural exercises. You can also set up your sets and repetitions using the pyramid system. So this is utilizing the number of repetitions, decreases, and then increases. Some examples you can utilize is going from light to heavy. So you can have a repetition of, say, 12 repetitions for the first set, 8 repetitions for the second, and then 6 for the third. Or you can go from a heavy, say, in the first set doing 4 repetitions, second set, 10 repetitions, and then the last set would be 12 repetitions. Another training technique is the cheating technique. So this is breaking strict exercise form to be able to lift a heavier resistance. So I would probably only utilize a cheating technique during, say, the bicep curl. You can also probably utilize this in, say, possibly the shoulder press. But whenever you're thinking about the deadlift, or if you're thinking about bench press or squat, I probably wouldn't utilize the cheating technique. You could consider, possibly bouncing the bar off your chest during the bench press as a cheating technique, but really, that could be possibly dangerous. Another technique is going sets to failure. So this is a little bit different compared to your drop sets, but your sets to failure is the set is performed until no further completion of reps with, while utilizing good exercise technique. So you can perform sets to failure, for 3 sets. So usually with your first set, that's going to be your most repetitions, and then your following sets are going to be a little bit less. When we look at the effectiveness of sets to failure, we can see that there are similar strength gains using sets to failure or not to failure. But when we look at muscular endurance, there is greater gains when training is going to failure. But when we look at power, the greater gains is whenever we are training not to failure. Some of the things with the effectiveness of sets to failure is that there's a greater increase in maximal strength and power when 4 sets are not to failure when comparing to performing 2 sets using to failure or not to failure. One of the things though, when you're kind of going sets to failure, is just utilizing any type of load range. So you can utilize 30% of your 1 rep max going to failure, or you can even utilize 70% of your 1 rep max and go into failure. So that's going to change the repetition. So obviously, if you're utilizing 30% of your 1 rep max, you're going to be performing a lot more repetitions in the first set, in second and third set, and so forth, depending on how many sets you're utilizing compared to your 70% 1RM. So, say for 70% 1RM, going to failure, you can hit like 13, but your next set may be, 7, and then, the following set may be 4. So just know that there are going to be some, differences as far as the amount of repetitions depending on the intensity you are utilizing. Some other techniques that you can utilize whenever you are performing repetition is the burn method, and this is performing half or partial repetitions after momentary concentric failure. Another one is what you're probably most familiar with and that you often utilize is the force or assisted technique. So this is after failure. Your partner concentrically helps you perform an extra 2 or 4 more repetitions. And usually that's the range that you want to stay in. Anything more isn't really going to be more beneficial for you. The other ones are going to be a partial rep. So this is a repetition performed with a restricted range of motion. So you can utilize partial reps, say, just kind of a, top of the head example is whenever you are performing the exercise is called 21 for your bicep curls. So what you're doing is, you are performing a partial rep from the bottom to the halfway point during barbell curl for your repetitions, and then you're going for, and that's performing 7 repetitions, and then you are performing from your halfway portion to the top portion of the barbell curl for 7 repetitions, and then performing 7 repetitions of the full bicep curl in its full range of motion. So part of that, you are performing, a restricted range of motion during that type of exercise. You can also perform a small increment technique, and this is just making smaller increases in the load than what is common utilize. You can also perform super slow technique, which is 10 seconds of concentric and then 4 to 5 seconds of eccentric portion of the lift. So the super slow isn't negative training. It's a little bit different, but we'll kind of talk about negative training here in a little bit. So when we kind of look at, beyond the different repetitions, as far as different technique style goes, you can utilize functional isometrics, which is performing a portion of the concentric phase and then continuing with a 5 to second isometric contraction. You can also perform implement training, which uses a variety of objects as a resistance to be lifted or moved. And then another way that you can incorporate into your program design or training is vibration training. This is most popular, is going to be kind of the whole body vibration, which involves standing on a vibrating platform. Usually with your vibrating training, it's specialized equipment for that. So depending on where you're at a certain university or strength and conditioning facility, they may or may not have these. Usually you're standing on it, performing overhead presses or squats, but you can also kind of utilize that platform to do push-ups as well. One training technique that is probably often utilized is the negative training technique, and this is performing the eccentric portion of a repetition with more than the individual's 1 repetition max. So by doing so, you can utilize a lot more load. So meaning that for bench press, say that your maximal bench press is 300 pounds, you can utilize 325 and just perform negatives or kind of your eccentric lifts, and by doing so you are applying a lot more stress to the muscle. You're causing a lot more muscle damage, and in theory that's going to cause a lot more muscle growth. You can also perform a super overload. So this is partial reps with 125% of your 1RM. So you may see partial reps, utilizing a bench press or the squat, where you're only going down to some sort of range of motion, and then going back up. Lastly, we already touched on this about using unstable surfaces. You can again utilize this type of training using a Swiss ball, some inflatable discs, a wobble board, or a BOSU ball. Sling training is grasping a sling or placing another body part, such as the foot, in a sling and then performing an exercise. When you think of sling training, you can think of this as the TRX system. So if you're not too sure, you can see here to the figure to the right, this is the TRX system. You can utilize the TRX system for different exercises such as the rows, push-ups. You can also bring and adjust the slings down so you can work on your hamstrings while you're lying down, and so forth. So the TRX system is primarily utilizing body weight. And by doing so, you can kind of adjust your body weight depending on how far you're kind of going out, if you're doing a row, and so forth. You can also perform functional training or incorporate functional training, and this is training to increase performances in activities of daily living or tests related to athletic performance. This is gaining a lot of popularity, it seems like, within the health and fitness community. So you probably will see this as far as individuals doing deadlifts, where they'll kind of have a split-legged stance, and then they'll kind of by doing so your knees are a little bent a little bit more. All right, you're still performing that hip hinge and doing a deadlift, but it's more mimicking like picking something up from the floor. There's also the extreme conditioning technique, which is a high volume, short rest period, multi-exercise program. So this is kind of like a big circuit, CrossFit type kind of training, if you kind of want to think about it that way. One thing though is that if you have individuals who are untrained or individuals following in a period of inactivity for a while, that they can develop exertional rhabdomyolysis, and this is excessive muscle tissue breakdown. Even trained individuals can display this exertional rhabdomyolysis, but it's very unlikely, but there's always that chance, just because if they have such a high volume or have short rest periods, where they're just going kind of 100% intensity at it, they can develop this condition. And this condition is very bad, just because it can shut down your kidneys and can lead to death. So you always want to make sure that you don't have this, by making sure that your urine is that clear to slightly yellow color. If you start to see your urine like a brown color, and then also that whenever you get DOMs, you usually have a limited range of motion. If you're really stiff and that stiffness isn't like fixed within a few days, and on top of your brown urine color, then it's time to go to the hospital and get fluids in you, and hopefully kind of help your kidneys get back on track. The last training techniques that we'll talk about that can be incorporated into program design is the rest pause training. This is also referred to as inter-repetition rest or cluster training. This is performing 1 to 5 repetitions with a heavy load followed by a short rest period before performing another 1 to 5 more repetitions. We can also incorporate complex training, and this is also referred to as contrast loading. And this is performing a power exercise after a strength exercise. Typically, we'll utilize complex training to increase or utilize within plyometric training. Just to recap, we went over the general techniques involved in properly performing resistance training exercises. Also, we provided the breathing guidelines for athletes on the eccentric and concentric portion of the lift. We were also able to determine the appropriateness of wearing a weight belt when lifting. Also, we learned the proper spotting technique for free weight resistance exercises, which is very important to help prevent injuries. We were also able to identify the appropriate technique and key technical flaws associated with alternative modes of exercises such as the tire flipping. Also, we learned how to appropriately determine how to apply resistance bands and chains to traditional ground-based free weight exercise. And lastly, we were able to identify and describe the alternative modes and non-traditional training techniques and different strategies on performing sets and repetitions.